What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Thought That Counts podcast. Myself, Michael Abello, here with my good buddy
Kevin Cruz.
And we are very excited today because we have our first guest bringing to you.
Hey guys. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead and introduce yourself, my friend.
Ramon.
We're actually really excited to have him on here. You know, given the circumstances that the world is in with COVID, he's still able to operate and continue with his career. So we thought it'd be really valuable for us to bring you someone who's navigating through this crazy time, and we hope you guys enjoy it. So for those of you that don't know Ramon, he is digital marketing director, and he has 18 years of combined experience in sales and marketing. Yes, guys, 18 years, and I believe the man is only 33 of age. So
not that big of a deal.
Yeah, well, he started early, so. Yeah, man, we're really happy to have him on the podcast, and thank you everyone for, sitting back and waiting for the next one, and here we are.
And I think before we get started, just real quick, I just want to say to everybody that's being affected by COVID-19, I think there's a lot of people out there. Just want to send out some good energy, some good vibes. I know a lot of people are getting sick, and some people have lost some people, and we're really fortunate to have not been affected by it that much. But it is a hard current time, so I just want to throw out some good vibes to everybody.
Appreciate that, man.
Hell yeah, good energy. Good energy. There's just so much good energy right now. I love it. Yes. All right, let's get into it, man. Talk to us a little bit about your upbringing. Were you close to your family? Maybe the relationships with your parents. Give us a little bit of a rundown of who you are as Ramon Khan.
Yeah. So actually, I grew up in Venezuela. It's going through a pretty hard time right now, but it was a little better condition when I was growing up over there. But I'd say I had a pretty good relationship with my parents. I didn't see my dad a lot growing up because he was always kind of working, so I still do appreciate the fact that he was a really good provider for us stuff. And he taught me a lot of really good lessons, so I'm really grateful for that. He was the kind of dad that was just very giving all the time. He was taught me to be really humble. He we would, if we were out in the street or something like that, we'd see some kids that didn't have any food. He'd be like, "Hey, why don't you give them your food?" and stuff like that. And then he'd still reward me with buying me some more stuff. We'd pick up more kids on the way. We'd go buy people a whole bunch of food and stuff like that. So I always kind of saw him being that way growing up. So I really like that. And my sisters got along really well with them for the most part. So and then my mom, I would say, was also really giving, which is another thing that I really like. And she was the kind of person that she was so giving. I remember coming home multiple times and just seeing a stranger in the living room, and I'd be like, "Who's that?" And she'd be like, "Hey, I just went to the store and I met this person, and they were they really needed help." So we had multiple strangers living with us at different times.
How many rooms did you have?
How many what?
Rooms.
Rooms? Well, depending on where we were at.
Well, they had the living room.
Yeah, we moved around quite a bit. But so originally from there, but she started doing that a lot more when we moved to the U.S. as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so just good relationship with them, and just kind of was taught to be very giving, and even during hard times over there. So. Yeah,
man, that's much needed right now. With everything going on in the world, it's really really good to have thoughtful parents.
Yeah.
As a kid, were you rich, poor, middle class? Obviously, in Venezuela, I don't imagine you were.
Right. So in Venezuela, it's always been pretty tough over there for at least the time that I was alive. I think before I was born, they had a little bit more of a flourishing time in the country. But I think I was actually born in the middle of a civil war that was going on over there. So I would hear.
Where were you born? I'm sorry.
86.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so at the time, that was around the time that the previous president was trying to overtake the dictator. And so there was I could hear F-16 jets going off and bombs, all kinds of stuff, So it was pretty crazy, but I just considered it normal because it was just what was going on over there.
Yeah.
And I think we grew up. My dad was a really good provider, which I really appreciated. So even though I didn't get to see him much, when I did get to see him, he was always being really nice and giving me presents and stuff. And I could always tell that we had a little bit more than other people. But he was always really good about making sure that we gave away toys, that we gave away clothes, that we helped out the neighbors, and he would take us to the neighbor's house and say, "Hey, we're going to give them food and stuff like that." And so I think growing up there, as far as when I was young, it's like I wouldn't say that we were rich, but you know, we definitely had more than other people.
Gotcha.
But you know, it's interesting because whenever we moved, we first moved to Canada, and in Canada, you know, we were living with family, right? And so we were immigrants, and it's like we went from being the people that had more to the people that, you know, didn't have as much, right?
Yeah.
And so I got to see both sides of that. So I think it was really nice though, because you know, since my dad humbled us when we were younger, you know, it was really interesting to see both sides of the experience. So we were the kids that, when we moved to the U.S. and stuff like that, people would make fun of us because we didn't have the clothes that kind of match. You know, that everybody, we were like, you guys have on high waters and stuff like that. We're like, what is
Like,
that?
what are you wearing?
We'd be like, is there going to be a flood? And we're like, what? We don't get it. Like, what?
That's all we got.
Yeah. And so, so we went through both sides. I would say, you know, we were never like struggling financially, thankfully, but we got to experience both sides of like having more and then not having as much as other people sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, man, interesting perspective. You know, being that young and just knowing that, wow, I know this side of life, and then I also am experiencing this side of life. It really gives you a lot of perspective.
Right.
You know, right? No, man, super interesting. Wow, this is great.
What age did you guys move to Canada and then eventually the U.S.?
So I was moving back and forth between the ages of 5. I was between 5 to 7, and so we were going back and forth from Venezuela to Canada. And then eventually, like around 7, 8 years old, we ended up moving to Butte, Montana, out of all places. Super tiny town.
Wow.
Yeah. We were in a city that was 99% white and like 1% other, and like we were the 1% other.
You were the only 1% other. Man.
But you know, I know there's a lot of, you know, like racial tension stuff going on right now in the country too as well. And I think, you know, one thing that was actually really interesting that I really loved about Montana is that I love the place, right? Like I told my wife we should go back, and it was really interesting. Yeah, it was amazing. It reminds me kind of like a Colorado. But yeah, it was funny because, you know, over there, you would expect there, you know, to be a lot of racial tension because everybody's white, you know. But I grew up around pretty much all white people, and I loved all of them. And it was funny. I would get like silly questions sometimes. Sometimes people would just look at me like, "Oh my gosh, like, can I touch your skin?" And like, you know, they had never seen like a person of color before. Yeah.
They're like, what? Why does she look like that?
Yeah. So I never got insulted. I just thought it was funny. But I actually really enjoyed living there. So it was interesting to see the.
Did you know English?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
okay.
by that time, yeah,
Okay.
we already learned English. It was kind of funny because well, yeah, like it's very different, you know, and how they teach, you know, the education, like in our country versus over there. But yeah, we kind of learned English a little bit, just kind of self-taught when we were in Venezuela. And so basically, like, we just kind of learned through like music and television and stuff like that. So
Okay.
by the time we moved to Canada, we already kind of knew how to speak a little bit. And then
To get by, enough
yeah.
to get by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we were just kind of learning
Okay.
as we were there too.
Yeah. Sweet. So yeah, man, straight into the career question. You know, what you do now. When did you know or have interest in what you're currently
Marketing.
doing?
Yeah, so like like, you know, Kev mentioned, you know, that I have like 18 years combined experience. I was actually in sales for a really, really long time. And I started out in sales, believe it or not. Like the first time that I did sales was like I was around 5 years old. And so I remember that's when we were living in Montana, and I was at the store with my dad, and we were walking by, and I saw this like huge box of pencils for like $1 or something like that. I was like, what the heck? Like, you know, like that's interesting. And he was telling me how in Venezuela, a lot of the teachers can't get their own school supplies. They're not provided. They have to pay for them. Yeah. And so then he was like, yeah. He's like, well, that's such a good deal. So I was like, you know, since we're going to be going to Venezuela soon, is there no way you can give me a loan, right? Like, can you let me buy, you know, a whole bunch of these pencils, right? So he gives me like a $10 loan. I get like hundreds of pencils in a huge bag. And so, and you know, he was just, you know, he didn't tell me to do that, right? It was just kind of on my own. So I remember landing and, you know, everybody like sleeping in, and I woke up really early, had my little bag of pencils, and I'm like, okay, where do I got to go, right? So I was just like,
5.
Yeah, 5 years old. So I'm like
Thinking
ready.
about stuff like that at 5, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do I give at 5? Right?
So then my cousin was like, hey, I'll go with you. So he walked me to the school, and I just went door to door, and within a few minutes sold all the pencils. And it was funny because towards the end of the trip, you know, like everybody, my dad kind of gave everybody an allowance for spending. And even though I was like the young kid, like all my sisters were like, hey, can I borrow some money? Because like, I ended up kind of financing some of their purchases and stuff. And so that was kind of like my introduction to sales. As far as like marketing goes, like I did sales like on and off since I was a teenager. And then I didn't get into marketing until I was like, probably like early 20s. And I met a guy who was working at one of the companies that I was working at, and he ended up becoming a good friend and a mentor. And it was funny because like he would always come in like super late, like he didn't even, he would just make up his own schedule. I don't even know when he worked. He would just randomly come in, and he was always like on the computer, just typing keys. He was very quiet, and I was like always just intrigued, like what does this guy do? So as I started kind of asking him, yeah, he would tell me a little bit, and I was just so confused, and I was like, this is so interesting though, like I just always found it very interesting right from the beginning. And so the more that I talked to him, the more that I got to know about it, and so we slowly became friends, and he just kept explaining it to me, and that was kind of my introduction to it. So I had somebody kind of teaching me behind the scenes a little bit of marketing for like a year or two while I was working there, and then that's kind of like how I got introduced to it.
So you didn't go to college for marketing?
No. So I think one of the interesting things about the going to college thing is like I personally kind of like got the experience for how to do marketing, and that's kind of how I got into it. But growing up, I was the youngest employee at a lot of the companies that I worked at. I would say like 90% of them. Did work at a lot of companies, and I saw that there was first of all, the reason why I worked at a lot of companies is I didn't see a lot of like benefit just kind of sticking around. So like if I saw somebody that was going to offer me more money, I just kind of went there. But yeah, a lot of the companies that I worked at, a lot of the people were much older than me, and a lot of them had degrees. And they had degrees in all different kinds of things. And I was just kind of like, well, like, how am I 18, and I'm working here, I'm making the same amount of money as you.
There's a disconnect
right.
somewhere.
And then like half of these people went to college, so I was kind of like, I didn't, like that right there was kind of a red flag, right? Like, why do I want to go to college if I'm going to be making the same amount of money as these people, these managers and stuff like that? And I remember walking into multiple interviews where I was going against people that had education. Like I knew that some of these people had college degrees while they were doing the interview. And I remember even it was this job was for like the largest one of the largest companies in Texas of its kind that I really wanted to work at. And the guy said, hey, like I have to go. It was a pretty long interview process, and he was like, I have this stack of resumes right here, and all these people have a degree, right? And he's like, you're going to be like the youngest employee that I've ever hired here, and you don't have a degree, right? Like, why should I hire you? And I told him, at this point, I already kind of learned, that the experience is what matters. Yeah. And I told him, it was because all these people that have all those degrees, you don't know if they're going to be able to do the job properly, right? But if you hired me, I'm going to make you look good, right? That's all that matters.
What age did you say that?
Yeah. I went.
What age?
Oh, I was probably like I was a teenager probably.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 19.
That's a lot of confidence for a 19-year-old.
Yeah, I was probably about 19 when that happened, when I took on that job, and he just kind of smiled, and he's like, you're right. He's like, at the end of the day, he's like, I want to look good to my managers, and I need to hire the people that are going to perform. So I learned from a really young age that like having the degree didn't correlate with being able to get the job or being able to get the position or having the performance, right?
Take notes on that, guys. That's a really good like spark note right there.
Yeah. I mean, I've been around, people that had, one of my old managers, he was a Harvard and MIT graduate. And I remember, sitting with him on a table and, talking to multiple people that went to like other people that went to Harvard and just highly educated people. And all of them agreeing like, hey, like the college experience, what you're going to gain from it, what they all agreed is, the connections, right?
Yeah.
So the networking is going to play for the rest of your life, but you can always network later. Right? You don't have to have that. It does help to say, hey, I went to Harvard, you went to Harvard. Yeah. That connection helps, but you can do it without it. And his piece of advice actually that he gave to me, he went on to launch other companies, and he's very successful as well. He said, if he had to do it all over again, and instead of going to MIT and Harvard and spending that whole time there, what he told me is that he would instead just do an internship. Mm-hmm. He's like, spend six months to a year of your life, sacrifice it, and find the person that's already doing what you want to do, right? That way you don't have to go your entire lifetime, right? 4 years.
You kind of expedite that process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember at that company actually, I talked to a lady that she had this really weird business, but she would sell beans. It was like beans for good kind of thing. It was like for a nonprofit that she had. And her example that she actually, told me over the phone was that she went to college for being a lawyer. And so the whole time since she was a little kid, she wanted to be a lawyer. And then, she went to school, she did the whole thing. And then when she came out, she was like, I hate being a lawyer, right? Like she didn't like it at all. And so then she ended up founding this other company where she like sold beans and like she gave it as a nonprofit and she helped out other companies. But it was like I had all these experiences that kind of told me that college is like, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I'm saying it's definitely that there's other alternatives, right?
Sure. It's not the
Internships
only. It's not the only route.
Right.
Yeah.
and of course, if you're a doctor or something like that, or anesthesiologist, like you need to have a degree, and if that's where you want to go, then for sure. But yeah, there's a lot of options.
Wow. You know, knowing you for a while, I know we talk about these stories. Tell them a little bit of your philosophy, like when you first started working. What age was that? I believe it was 16. You said you started working.
Yeah, I actually
Yeah.
lied about my age to start working because I was so ready to work.
Don't lie, guys. Don't lie. Please don't lie.
First job interview, lie
Yes.
to him directly.
So yeah, tell the audience about like your philosophy when you first started working and
Okay.
how you tried to move up every time you had a new job. And
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, so I think if anybody like tries to be loyal to the company, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if you're working with a good company that you're happy with, I think that's a good thing. But a lot of the loyalty that people have, actually, like this is a pretty crazy story. So, but I mean, all these stories that I kind of take in, they kind of shape the way that I look at things. And I'll tell you this story before I continue. I met a guy the other day at Sprouts. I've known the guy. I've seen him a whole bunch of times, and he was an older Hispanic gentleman. And he was telling me how I was kind of like, hey, how do where are you from and all this stuff. And he was from Mexico, so my wife, she has a family in Mexico. And I found out that he came over here when he was really young, right? And he was like in his 20s or 30s, somewhere I believe. And he said he came over here because he wanted to make a little extra money that he was going to send back to his family.
Yeah.
So, he's like, that was kind of the goal. He's like, I'm going to make a little bit of extra money. I'm going to work for a company for a long time. Eventually, I'm going to retire, and then we're going to just go back over there.
Yeah.
So then the guy comes over here, and then he worked for a really long time for a really famous Houston company, a restaurant. And he had that mentality of like, if I stick with this company, eventually I'm going to move up. Eventually, I'm going to get hired to do something else. I'm going to have a really good career.
the secure and safe route.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. Excuse me. And he said, after working for them for like 20 years, he ended up getting fired. And he's like, they didn't give him, any other compensation other than what he had already gotten paid. So he was working at Sprouts, and he looks like he's about in his 50s now. And he told me, he was like, man, he's like, I came here with this goal of making a better life for myself. And he's like, and what I realized is that I lost my whole life. I came here in my 20s or 30s. He's like, I'm old now. And he's like, and I'm starting to think now that, I'd be better off just, being with my family and my kids, And so I've seen a lot of these stories of like people, just kind of, working and sticking to something for a really long time and it not paying off. And even as a recruiter, I saw that, sometimes I would see like people that were older, like welders that would come in. I saw one guy that, he had burn marks all over himself and, he was like begging me for this job. And I knew that, they weren't going to hire him because unfortunately people discriminate whether, it's legal or not.
Yeah.
The employers will tell you like, hey, we need somebody young. This is going to be a hard job. And so I saw the drawbacks of being loyal to a company. Mm-hmm. And so the way that I looked at it is like, at the end of the day, we're trying to make money, right?
True.
So if you're trying to make money, if I'm working somewhere and somebody's going to pay me more, then I'm going to work for the other guy, right? And so that's kind of how I started out. When I first got a job, my first job, I lasted there probably like less than a week before somebody was like, hey, I can hire you here for this much. And I lasted at that job for a few months, and then somebody was like, I found this job that you can have. And so I just kind of kept going up through that pattern. And I think by the time I was, my goal was always to make more than my age. And so if I was 16, I wanted to be like making more than $16 an hour. If I was 18, I wanted to make more than $18 an hour. And that's kind of like what I kind of set for my pace.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think by the time I was 19, I was making about $22 an hour, I think around there. But
You're
I was,
doing well.
I was never scared to just be like, screw you. Like if I didn't like the job, if I wasn't happy, I would just be like, okay, I'm moving on, and there'll be something better, something else better out there. For anybody that's stuck in a career or a job that they hate, I would just tell you always something that I did growing up, which was kind of rare. I know a lot of people would be like, what the heck? Is anytime I would quit a job or get fired, I would have a celebration, right? Mm-hmm. And so I know a lot of people, like when they quit a job or get fired, they're like depressed or freaking out.
Yeah.
They're like, I need to save all my money, right?
Yeah.
And so what I would do is do the opposite. I would call all my friends and my family members, and I'd be like, we're going to celebrate, And what I was celebrating was the end of one, door closing and, another one opening. So I feel like that was, I agree, would always set that intention. So
Another spark note, guys.
yeah.
That is a very interesting, philosophy at such a young age. Obviously, you're a risk taker, right? But sometimes you have to risk it big to make it big.
Yeah.
So
You gotta trust in yourself.
yeah.
Yes.
Talk to us about your, I guess, your school life. You know, when you were younger, were you a good student? Were you like focused in sports, or did you just go to school to eat lunch and hang out with friends? You know, like talk to us a little bit about that time in your life.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think you know, starting out in school, Venezuela, it's really different over there. So over there, you can start off school when you're like about 3 years old. And I was always kind of like a troublemaker kid. Like I had trouble focusing in school, but my mom wanted to put me in school when I was 3. So over there in kindergarten, you're 3 years old, and you have to learn how to read, write, add, and subtract. Right? That's what you need to learn before you move into first grade.
Yeah.
So at first grade, you're 4 years old, and then before you move into second grade, you also have to know how to do all of that plus multiply and divide. So it's like it's very different than here, right? Because like over here, I didn't realize that kids didn't start school until like around 5, and then you know what they're doing in kindergarten was really really different. So in Venezuela, for example, even in first grade, you can't. There's never anything multiple choice. Everything's open ended. So in first grade, you're expected to write essays, like front to back essays. You have to write in cursive. You can't write in print. So it was just really, really different. You know, it's like we were already reading chapters, writing essays, doing tests, and
They
all that stuff.
expected more from you.
Yeah. So when we moved to,
insane.
yeah, it's pretty crazy. So when we moved to Canada, I remember we were in the first grade. My sister and I, they were like teaching us the ABCs, you know, and we were like, what? Like, what the heck is going on? You know, like.
So
We know this.
So you're 4 or 5, and you can literally you have the attention span to sit down and write an essay
Yes.
with a pencil on a piece of paper.
Yep. And yeah, you have to write essays.
Is it just like the fire truck is red?
No. I mean, like when I remember my first grade classes, they were teaching us about, you know, Christopher Columbus and how we got colonized, and
What?
we had to write essays on that, and yep, I remember asking questions about that, and they were all open-ended questions. The teacher actually read each question, and if you didn't write more than like 2 sentences, she would be like for each answer, right? So like a 20-page question test, for example, like in first grade. It's very different.
I mean, that's admirable to ask.
Yeah. So when we moved to to Canada, my sister and I, we were kind of like just milking it for a little bit because we're like, oh, we're having another ABCs again.
This is cake. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, we don't know this. Yeah.
But after a while, we were kind of like, okay, like when's this actually going to get challenging, you know? So that was a big difference. But you know, I always kind of noticed how the educational system here was really different, right? It's just very like, you know, the multiple choice and.
You mean different as in like lax?
Yes, you know, and so basically that created a lot of I don't know how I can say it, like it created a lot of problems with how I was interacting with school because it was really boring, right?
Yeah.
So I actually ended up being like a very troubled kid throughout all school. I got good grades when I wanted to, so I could be a straight A student if I wanted to, but most of the time I was just messing around.
Yeah.
So that kind of led into kind of getting in with the wrong crowd. But I remember at one point in time I got kicked out of my high school that I was going to. For disciplinary problems, and they put me in a charter school, right? So in this charter school, it's the exact same textbook, the exact same everything that you have to do in public school, right? Down to the T. The only difference is that you do it at your own pace, right?
Self-paced.
Yeah. So what in the regular school, it was broken down like this, right? So if you had world geography, for example, or history, you would read the chapter one day as a class. Then you would do the vocabulary the next day, right? So that was the second day. The third day, you would do a quiz. The fourth day, you would get a study guide for the final exam or the exam that you were going to do for that chapter.
Yeah.
And then the fifth day, you would do the exam, right? So it always took 5 days.
It was like progressive.
Yes. And then when I went to the charter school, I realized that what took 5 days, I could do in about an hour. And so I was doing about 5 chapters a week, right? So I actually ended up breaking a couple records, and I was able to do like a whole entire semester in 2 weeks. And so I was able to do a whole entire school year in a month. So what took one school year to do in high school, you can actually do it within 1 month without a teacher, right? Because the teacher that was there, they just kind of sit there, you know? It's a general teacher, you have a whole bunch of different grades there, and then she's just kind of there if you have a question, which you're going to have a question once a week or something. So it just basically gets paid to supervise you. And so what I realized at that point is that, you know, the educational system here, it's kind of like, that's another reason I didn't really want to go to college, because it's kind of like, if we can teach ourselves a year worth of school in 1 month, right? You know, then why can't we just get our own books and teach ourselves, right? So that's another thing that I kind of noticed that was interesting.
Did you realize that other kids could do that, or you could do that?
There's a lot of kids that graduated really early.
Okay.
So a lot of the kids were trouble kids in the school, right? Because they got kicked out. So a lot of them were kind of like still messing around. And then there were some of the kids, kind of like myself, that were kind of like, oh, well, if I can graduate early, right? Might as well get the heck out of here.
Yeah.
So I was in the path to do that, to graduating early, because I was kind of like, well, if I can do my whole year in a month, then I'll just knock out all my classes. And then unfortunately, I ended up getting kicked out of that school as well.
Plot twist.
Right.
Oh, Lord.
But, you know, it's, I just wanted to work anyways, you know? So I looked at it kind of like, I'm wasting my time, right? I'm learning a whole bunch of stuff that's never going to be applicable for the most part, besides the basic stuff that you learn kind of like in elementary. That's mostly what you use, you know, throughout life.
Yeah.
And a lot of the high school stuff with all the science and all, I mean, it's just like, I've never really had to use it ever, right? So I kind of realized I'm kind of wasting my time here. Like, I was ready to make money. I was already trying to like do side hustles and jobs when I was like a teenager, like 13. And so, like I said, I lied to start working at 15, so I was just kind of like, I'm ready to make some more money. I'm ready to go full time. I'm ready to get this.
You're pretty much entrepreneurial at that time already.
Right.
Would you attribute that like to your schooling in Venezuela and how like difficult it was, or did you attribute that really to your father or like your parents?
You know, my dad wasn't really entrepreneurial. I think that part of it, I'm not sure exactly where I got it from. I know that both of my grandparents were entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And so I don't know if like maybe it skipped him and then yeah, but they were very well known entrepreneurs in their city. So I don't know if that maybe has something to do with it, but I don't know. I just kind of always, I like making money, you know. So like I think when I was growing up,
Money was the motive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, like I saw a lot of my friends that were like asking their parents for money. And my dad, he was really cool. So if I ever told him like, hey, can I have $50 for this, or I want to go out with my friends, he's like, here's $50, here's whatever, you know.
You knew you were responsible.
Yeah, but I just kind of wanted to be like, I want my money, you know. Like I know you got your money, I want my money, you know, and I want to be able to spend it on whatever I want, and yeah. So I don't know. I just kind of always had that in my head.
That's a really unique experience, you know. At
I've
that
got
age.
a couple questions saved for later.
Yeah,
Sure.
no, that's wow. I didn't even know that, and I've known you for a while, so thank you for sharing that. Yeah, now we're gonna. That was a lot already. I feel like there was so much value just in that portion. And we're gonna be getting a little bit more specific now into the career. So go for it, Mike. Take it away.
All right. So you are a digital marketing director
Yes.
now. Okay. So how did you transition from the sales experience to the actually getting into the marketing field? Because they're sort of similar, but they're very different in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, so I think actually, you know, what helped a lot, the sales actually helped a lot. And so I think what I realized is, you know, with the marketing, it's basically like sales, but you use the different tools, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, if you're understanding sales, you have to understand people's need, why they want to buy something, you know, psychology behind it, understanding your product and all that kind of stuff. And so with marketing, it's a lot of the same thing. Kind of understanding human behavior, but you're just using different tools. You're using, you know, advertising, you know, digital ads, you know, AdWords, like different ways to generate the lead and different ways to kind of use copywriting to kind of convert them. Okay. And so it was, like I said, I had experience with the person that I was working with before that was kind of teaching me, and then I ended up getting into the field just kind of like with that experience, was able to kind of get in there, and yeah, just kind of learn on the job. So. A lot of it was that. I think I was very, very much self-taught. I think, you know, when it comes to marketing, that's one thing, you know, when you're talking about going to college for marketing, I think this is a really important point, is, you know, college textbooks, it's a format, you know, you have to write it out and you have to get it approved and all this different stuff. And by the time somebody writes the curriculum and publishes it,
It's years behind.
Something
behind.
new. Yeah.
Way behind. And I think on certain things, like if you're an anesthesiologist, right, like that didn't change very much, like 20 years ago. But if you're in marketing and something's a year old, I mean, dude, that's
light years. Your light years
The
away.
iPhone comes out every year. for a reason.
Exactly. So that's one thing that it's for that specific reason. I would almost kind of discourage people to go into college for marketing, especially with digital marketing. I think you're going to learn a lot of things from there. But I've talked to other digital marketers that have went to college for it, and they were like, "Dude, this totally didn't prepare me at all for my job." Right?
So getting back to the career and everything, did you have like a biggest fear as like along your career path, or as it got started, anything like that?
Yeah, I think with the digital marketing, I think my biggest fear was, I mean, even with sales, it was just, you know, was I going to be good enough? I think that was always a big fear. I think with sales, I remember the first time that I started out doing that, I just kind of got thrown into it. It kind of happened that way with both. And so that helped a little bit, just kind of diving right into it.
Sink or swim, right?
Right. But yeah, especially specifically with digital marketing, I think it was trying to figure out, when am I actually going to, I wanted to be able to really deliver value to people. That was my ultimate goal. And so it was kind of like, when am I going to reach that threshold where I know that I'm really highly valuable? So I think it took a while for me to kind of understand, talking to different people, and then eventually kind of measuring myself against where I was at. I started to realize it whenever I followed these specific digital marketers, by the way. Like, if you're trying to look into who to follow, I would highly recommend Brian Dean, Neil Patel. People like that, like them, are really good. And I think when I started to realize it was, number one, when I was getting recognized by other people as an expert, right? So when I was getting featured by other people, and they were kind of like, hey, wow, this guy has really good value to offer, that kind of helped out a little bit. Talking to other marketers helped out as well, and kind of gauging where they were at based on how long they've been doing it. And really, I think the ultimate part for me that kind of helped me overcome that fear was when I started looking at the tutorials of the top people, the really famous multimillionaire marketers, and then realizing that I was actually coming up with better processes. I had better tools, better processes, and so it was a point in time where I was kind of like not looking at their advice at all, right?
I got this.
Right. And so that was pretty cool to be able to be like, wow, they're teaching it like this, but I actually figured out a way to do that way better, way faster, and way more efficient. So I would say that was probably my biggest fear. So it did take me a while to kind of overcome that, but I would say, to help you overcome it is, definitely like talk to other people, figure out where they're at, and that'll help you kind of figure out.
So that's,
Where you're
I'm
at.
assuming at the same time, like, that's the biggest thing that you've also learned, is that you're good enough to do your job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Which is
I hope so, man.
right.
So you work from home now, right?
Yes.
How long have you done that?
So I've been working from home for about 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually was working with second to last company I was working from home for about a year from then, but yeah, about 5 years with this company. And yeah, I like it. I don't think it's for everybody. Like if you're getting forced into working from home right now, obviously it's a different circumstance. But if you have a choice, I know a lot of my friends that have the option to work from home, but they just want to get up and go to an office. Like if you have a good place to work at, I think it comes with its own pros and cons. But I personally prefer it, and I really enjoy working from home. So
Okay. Do you feel, I guess this is more like relatable to, it might be relatable to certain people, do you feel doing digital marketing from home just because you're not tied to the aspect of the people, in a sense, or is that not correct?
yeah. So you're saying because I don't have to have other people to work in a team with? Or?
Correct.
I mean, I've worked with other people on teams with doing digital marketing as well. I feel like, the thing about digital marketing, I guess, that kind of makes it better to be able to work from home too as well, is like a lot of things happen slowly, right? So whereas, where you're like on the phone or something like that, it's like back to back and it's ongoing.
It's more efficient.
Right. Well, not so much more efficient, but it's like you're getting tangible results as you're going the whole time. Whereas with marketing, you can be working back to back like that, but you're not going to get the results from what you're doing for a while. And so if you're working with a team with somebody, it's kind of like you're getting assigned a project and you're kind of doing some of the work, but then you're not reporting right away. And so you can use communication tools that will kind of, since there's always usually a delay in between what you're having to do and when it gets turned in or whenever you get the result from it. I think that kind of helps a little bit too with
Okay.
how that works.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Hey, you know better than we do. Okay, so.
To say the least.
Yeah.
So for the listener, is there a specific type of person that you would say is like built to be like in the marketing field, or would you say that you can apply certain traits and eventually develop and become great at what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think, for the most part, what I would say is that if you're like a highly logical, analytical person, I would say that definitely is more on the internet marketing side. Whereas, there might be some aspects of that could play into digital marketing where if you're more artistic, maybe like graphic design, which is not exactly digital marketing, but I typically see people that are like super logical and analytical. Like that's kind of the person that usually really likes internet marketing. There's a lot of measuring, and also you have to have delayed gratification. Like if you're somebody that wants a tangible result right away, like if you're like, for example, like on a phone call and you were able to close a sale on that one phone call and you kind of like that, then you would probably hate marketing because you do something here and you might have to wait 3 months to figure out what you were doing was right. And so, but yeah, if you like measuring things, if you like tracking stuff and things like that, so like there's a lot of like testing. trial error,
Experimenting.
yeah, experimenting, measuring the results and, kind of regrouping, reorganizing, strategizing for, how to make it better. There's a lot of that, right? So like if you don't really enjoy those aspects of it, I would say that's probably not a good one for you. And I would say if you're kind of like in the lifelong learner, if you love doing research and learning, that's personally why I really like it. So I think with sales, it's very, in the beginning, it can be really hard when you first start out, especially because you're learning the industry and the product. But once you become really good at it, once you're at that place where you're like a top performer for that company, it becomes super repetitive, right? Because you understand it really well, and it's just not fun anymore.
Yeah.
So when
I do the motions.
Right. So when I saw marketing, I saw it as this like giant puzzle, right? And it's like a really hard to solve puzzle, and it changes all the time because then they're like, oh, okay, it's a different puzzle now. You have to figure this out, and the times change, the industries change, technologies change. There's always like some kind of
constantly innovating.
Exactly. And so if you like doing a ton of research and you like reading a lot and like you enjoy those kind of challenges, then you're very analytical, then I would say that's the kind of person that I would recommend.
That's really good, guys. Man, wow. So you can probably ask yourself that question right now. If maybe it's something you're looking into. See if you fit those checks, and if you do, then you should look into it.
All right, so especially because we're going through, I don't want to say Corona because the beer, but COVID. Being obviously you have the ability to work from home. Your career hasn't died off in any way, shape, or form. I would imagine.
Right.
Like you're still doing I wouldn't say just fine, but you're still doing fine. You're still able to get through everything. So for you specifically, like the world that we live in today, it's been like even keeled, steady the whole time.
Right. So I know a lot of people, and I stay home a lot too. So it's like I've even had other people that were like, "Hey, how are you doing? Like I'm having to like hang out with my case, all this, and like it's been so hard to work from home." And I think for me, I'm just kind of like, "Oh, okay, sorry, I can't sympathize there." I get it. Like some people are not used to that. For me personally, because I have been working from home and I hang out with my kids a whole bunch, I hang out with my wife a whole bunch. It's kind of like it hasn't really been. It's kind of been the same thing that it was before. And so, that hasn't really changed a lot. I know some as far as the industry as a whole, it is kind of getting affected a little bit. So certain industries that are like, the travel industry, the cruise industry, for example. But, there's always going to be a need for marketers, right? So if you're looking at marketing as far as like job security, it's made it through every single depression and recession. There's always been some kind of need for marketing.
Everybody's trying to buy something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I see it more as like just people that maybe are getting displaced, but they definitely is a need for them in other industries. So if you are thinking about getting into marketing, and one thing that I would say is like not follow. I mean, I'm not gonna say like for sure not follow the passion, but like I think one of the reasons that that I've been able to kind of like work the company that I work with, we're like in a super boring niche, right? And I think that a lot of people, when they're trying to think about niches, they're thinking about, something that they're really passionate about, which sometimes, can have an effect too as well. So certain niches that people are passionate about, like makeup and stuff like that, are still doing well. But if you look at some of these boring niches, kind of like, I consider boring, some people might like it, but like home improvement or like, toilets or plumbers or roofers or dentists, right?
It's essential.
Right.
Essential.
Like, I don't want to work for a dentist, but it's like a lot of people are going to the dentist right now. They're trying to get their teeth fixed. A lot of people are trying to fix their house. So we're like in the air conditioning niche, for example, and it's super boring, but it's doing really well right now. So that's one of the niches that's actually growing. So
is it growing well because it's the summertime or just in general?
Both.
Okay.
So so like I think right now, just specifically on that one, I think there's a lot of things that, for example, with HVAC, the people, it's a really expensive product. And so like typically people will just kind of make the decision on the fly. Yeah. But because they're kind of working from home and they have a little bit extra time, they're like, let me check online, right? Yeah. And so that's actually playing into our favor. So it's
they're putting more thought into it.
Right.
Pun intended.
Pun intended.
Like, do you have like the happiest moment you can think of throughout your career? Like some of the highlights that you enjoyed, anything like that?
Specifically on the marketing side, I would say I've actually been able to make a lot of really good friendships.
Okay.
Unfortunately, on the marketing side of things, people are kind of really secretive for the most part. So
Really?
yeah, it's not like sales. Like, I mean, I feel like in the sales industry where I was in that, like, I feel like a lot more people were willing to share and stuff like that. But I get it. It's because, once you become a really good digital marketer, you can kind of do the things for yourself. And so it's like, if you kind of teach people what you're doing, then they can kind of copy it and reverse engineer it.
That's interesting.
Right. So it's very, very competitive in that sense. But I have been able to make some really good friendships along the way. So that's been like really rewarding.
Okay.
That's priceless.
Yeah. And I think just being able to help people, I think that's been really cool. So I have friends that have been able to help with their businesses. And I remember a while back, I had a friend that when he started out, when I met him, he was like in a super tiny, like one person. He was a one-person company in a super, super tiny office. And it was around that time that I was actually teaching marketing here in Houston, and I had a meetup where I would have people that I would teach it to. And he showed up, and I remember I had like 15 or 20 people on the table that I was teaching all that stuff to. And when he showed up a little bit late, and I was like, oh, he's probably gonna be bored, like this is weird. It's not like his thing, but he was really quiet, just kind of taking notes. And at the end, I asked him, "Did you enjoy it?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's fine." And I was like, "He's just trying to be nice, right?"
Yeah.
So a few months later goes by, and he tells me, like when I go back to visit him, he's like, "Oh yeah, I rented out, the top floor of this building, And I'm like, "Whoa, right? That's pretty cool,
Yeah.
And so then, he keeps going, and then like maybe about a year or two pass by after that he ends up like now he has a spot in the Galleria. He's like one of the top in his industry in the whole city of Houston, which is a really competitive niche. To be able to afford an office in the Galleria, it's pretty hard.
Yep.
So I'm like, wow, like he got his whole entire building for himself, and so
You sparked that kind of.
Well, no, I didn't really know. So like I ended up asking him. He was telling me like, hey, I got this thing. It's pretty big now. I got a lot of people. So I still want to grow, but I don't want to grow too quick. So I told him, come by. We'll check out your stuff, and I'll help you out for free. So as I open up his website and I'm kind of looking into the back end, I told him, I was like, man, you're actually ranking really well. You're actually doing pretty good. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I think that's part of the reason my business has been able to grow. So I asked him, who's managing this for you? And he's like, oh, it's me. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I just kind of like, I was like, well, how did you learn? And he's like, well, I looked a little bit online, and then he's like, I went to your meetup, that day that I went over there, and he's like, and I was just taking notes the whole time. So he's like, I went home, and I started putting all those notes together, and I started putting all this stuff into the website, and he's like, and I haven't touched it ever since. And I was like, whoa, right? Like, that's crazy, because at that time, he was still a one-man show.
Yeah.
And with that same work that he put in, he was able to go from one-man show to like,
Where is that
one
now?
of the top businesses in Houston.
That's
So
legit.
that was like super rewarding. I would say like felt really good.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah. But
Yeah, man. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you don't know how like you're gonna really impact somebody.
Right.
So you just give.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So you kind of answered this before. You said internships, and then you mentioned as far as like trying to follow people on social media for marketing. But for somebody coming up like in high school, or say they are in college and they do listen to this, is there like a specific route you would give them? Any specific advice as far as wanting to get into marketing?
Yeah, I would definitely say like, try stuff out. I think a lot of the marketing is very theoretical. And so I would say, start a blog, start a podcast, start a YouTube channel, something, start a drop shipping store. There's a lot of information online that you can look at as far as like, different courses and stuff like that. I think it's easy to get stuck a lot in the theory of it. And so I would say, just like learn enough and then start experimenting, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if you're looking at it for, it's obviously the experience is what I saw with, if you're going to work for a company, the experience is what pays off the most. Mm-hmm. So if you have something to show that, hey, I started this podcast and I was able to grow this, or I started this social media account and I was able to grow that, that's a really good thing. So I would definitely say like, don't get stuck in the theory of it. Start experimenting, start something. And, just kind of find some people that you really like, that you feel are influential. Whether that be like Gary Vee or Brian Dean or Neil Patel or whoever it is that you like, and kind of start learning from them. So I would say definitely don't wait until like, if you are going to go to college for it, don't wait until you get into college and to start doing it and start experimenting. So I would just say just start doing that right away. That would probably be my number one piece of advice.
That's really good advice, and it's going to help. It's going to help a lot, like really shave off that time where you're figuring out like maybe it's not something I want to do.
Right.
Or be like, okay, this is it. Like, I love this.
Right.
So that's really good advice.
Yeah, Because I feel like a lot of people go to college too, and they just go to college for the sake of being in college, versus like trying to.
That's me. That's me. But nonetheless, it was a good experience. But we're here now. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, talking about life, everything that you've been through, kind of your career, how you were at school, kind of the way you learned and you were brought up, especially with the world we're living in today, specifically relating to your career. How has your perspective on life changed since starting this career? Like when you knew, like, okay, I enjoy this career, I'm pretty good at it. How has this whole experience, in a nutshell, really changed you?
It's an interesting question. I would say something that I didn't think about before. It's like a lot of us kind of just use technology without really knowing how it works. So we kind of get into like social media and we're using Facebook, and it's like when you kind of start learning digital marketing, it opens up a whole other side of the world, right? Yeah. You start to realize that Facebook is not free; it's costing all your privacy, right? Yeah. Or like if you're reading a blog, like it's not a free blog. There's advertising on there, or there's affiliate links. There's some kind of way. Like everybody's trying to benefit from something online, right? So we kind of look at the World Wide Web as something that's free, where really there's like a whole bunch of hustlers, a lot of people doing different things on there, right? Trying to get your attention and stuff like that. So I think that's one definitely an eye-opening perspective of like how I look at the world differently. Is like I'm always kind of aware of like even if I'm watching a movie, who's trying to market to me? Is it the clothes? Is it the brand? Whatever's in there. So getting into marketing in general, that kind of changed it. And other than that, I mean, like I said, I picked a niche that was boring, and I was kind of like, we've talked about it before, whether should you do like your passion or getting into that a little bit.
It's a big question.
Yeah, it's not a there's no right or wrong answer, right? A friend of mine that was reading a book on it, he was kind of mentioning to me how you can start off with a passion and then turn it into a job, and then it turns into like a job that you don't like, and you can end up hating that passion. So like for example, like I love doing yoga, but I would never want to be a yoga instructor. And I think that if I try doing that, I mean, at least right now, right? Like that can always
lose
change.
all of its fun.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And so, I definitely learned the difference between like what you love and then what you love to do. So I feel like, I realized that, at least for money, right? Like for money, like I don't mind, like doing marketing and saying like, all right, well, here's how much it's going to cost. And, that's how it works, right? But if I was trying to do like yoga, like I would want to do a yoga session with my friends, or like just pay for that and like not be like, oh, like now you have to pay me for this session, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to find kind of what you're comfortable with. But yeah, there's no right or wrong way. But I'm kind of happy that I stuck with this super boring niche, because obviously it kind of paid off in a way. Yeah, with the COVID, and so that is another thing. So like I was kind of looking into a whole bunch of different niches, and then the COVID thing kind of just that later, right? It's kind of like, okay, so what businesses are flourishing right now?
Yes.
And so I would definitely
good question for
do some research as a marketer as far as like what industry to get into, right? There's some industries that are really getting hit hard, and there's some industries that are like just absolutely thriving because of the COVID. So, yeah.
That kind of answers the question about adapting to the changing times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically answer all of that right in that one
lump sum.
Lump sum. Yeah.
And especially because you're in marketing, obviously technology changes year after year after year. You have to, like, as far as interacting with the company, changing to direct to consumer, and how you're gonna like, okay, this is in, this is not in, yada yada yada.
Right.
Sweet.
Oh man, we want to just thank you so much for all the advice, really kind of the scoop on what it takes to be a digital marketer, especially in these crazy times. We keep saying this because it's happening and it's real right now. And there's a bunch of people being affected by this. And just to know that there are careers that are kind of COVID proof in a sense. I feel like this is great content for everybody. So with that being said, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, to somebody that's thinking about getting into marketing, I think one piece of advice that I would give him is kind of think about how you want to work in the marketing industry. So there's like 3 main levels to kind of get into it. One of them is kind of in-house, right? So you're working for somebody. It's typically like one client. Then you have the agency model, which you're kind of working for somebody that has a lot of clients and you're managing multiple accounts. And then you have the freelancer method, right? Which is like you're kind of like a business consultant or business owner type freelancer. Obviously, the last one's going to give you the most payout and the most freedom, but you also have to like learn how to do your own taxes and do the 1099s and your own bookkeeping, all that different kind of stuff, lead generation. So some people might not like that. With the agency model, you have a lot more. You're going to learn a lot more about how to do a lot of things, but it's going to be hard to specialize in any one of them. But you do learn really good multitasking and project management skills and account management. So if you want to possibly own your own agency later, that's a really great way to get into it. And with the in-house, what I like about that one is that if you're just starting out, I recommend maybe doing in-house. And the reason for that is because you'll be able to specialize. So I think a really interesting thing that's important for a lot of people to think about in the future is specialization, right? When you're not specialized, it's really hard to charge, a lot. And being specialized, when you have that expertise, you're very subjective in what you do, it's going to help that, to be able to charge really good rates. So with the in-house thing, what I like about it is you start out, they don't expect you to know everything. You're kind of more of like, an asset to the company. You're kind of still learning as you grow, outsourcing the rest, and you get to specialize and kind of pick your things. And then that can easily transfer into becoming a freelancer or business consultant because now you have your specialization. So, and then also think about the size of company you want to work with, whichever one, with the agency or the in-house. So that's going to matter as far as like whether you're just a number or you're like smaller part of a small team. I personally prefer small to mid-sized companies. I've worked for a lot of really large companies and I don't really like that environment, kind of corporate. But that's up to you, and definitely think about all that stuff so that way you kind of get an idea of how you get into the field. So
That's awesome.
Wow. Air clap for that one, guys. We're really big on this whole one thought can change the world, because thoughts do become things if you put effort and you execute on it. So is there something that you can leave with the audience as far as like a thought?
Wow.
That
Or something that you use.
something that you use, like I think this will give the audience a sense of, who is Ramon,
Oh, that's hard. But man, as far as like the whole one thought can change the world thing, like that's deep, and I think that's totally true. There's a lot of truth to that. One story that comes to mind is there's a really cool TED talk on the paradox of choice is one. And the guy was talking about how sometimes when we have more choice, we can actually feel less happy. But he was talking to a lot of different people, and he was talking about how we came about to working, this idea of working, right? We're talking about working and do different jobs. And I don't know, I studied tribes a lot when I was growing up just because I'm weird. And like as a teenager, I was like obsessed with tribes. So like,
interesting man.
Yeah.
Interesting man here.
So I noticed that, in their natural state, they don't work a lot, like they're nomadic for the most part. So they do a lot of work for a little bit of time when they set up their living space. But then after that, they work maybe a few hours a day to hunt, and then they spend the rest of the day smoking tobacco, chilling, looking at the stars, hanging out with their family, taking showers, and it's a very different lifestyle than what we live. And we like to think of them as, uncivilized, right? But, we have this very different idea of how we perceive the world. We get into our little metal boxes and we live in our little boxes, and, we're always trying to just work for money and stuff like that. And, how we came about doing that is really interesting. The guy was talking about how before that we had this multi-family household in our country, right, in America. And how, people just kind of did their barter system, their trade system, they grew their crops, they made clothes and different stuff like that. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that people started, figuring out how do we get people to come work in these factories, right? And so then he was like, well, we need to pay them, right? And so then, the guy that actually started out the factory system, he ended up, later on in his life, kind of regretting what he started. And he said, he would go to the factories and he would see that the statement that he said is that a man will become as dumb as the task that you give him, right?
That is deep.
Yeah, it's really deep. So he said, if you just have to put a screw in, he said after a while, these people will put that screw in to the point where they drive themselves nuts, because they're doing that for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. And so, it's, I think, the thought is, what's interesting, you know, is that this guy just planted a thought, right? The thought is like we should get people out of their multifamily households into factories so we can pay them money so that we can become better capitalists, right? We want capital for ourselves, and that's the way that we get humans to trade for that. And that thought spread, and it hasn't changed ever since, right?
Everywhere.
Yeah, it's never really changed, right? So, you know, you have to be careful with your thoughts, and you know, think about what they are because they're really powerful. You know, I think the last one that I can think of, or another one that comes to mind, is you know, Bitcoin. You know, we don't know who started Bitcoin. You know, it's a secretive thing. You know, nobody, but you know, it's something that somebody put out there, and now, you know, these alternative currencies are kind of taking over the world, taking over finances. And it's a really great example of how, I mean, really, when you're using Bitcoin, you don't know who you're supporting, you don't know who's behind it, but it's that example of it's a thought, right? Yeah. It was just a thought. It's like, hey, how about we create a digital currency? And people were like, yeah, sure. And it's like nobody really knows who's behind it. Nobody really knows what the heck. For all you know, it could be like, I mean, you don't know, right? And so, but it's just interesting how it was just simply a thought that introduced that, right? And now that thought has taken over the entire world, and the entire world and all the governments are using it just simply from a thought. So the thought definitely counts. Yeah, it's crazy. But.
That was deep, guys. That right there, that is, yeah.
That is a great way to end, folks.
I appreciate you guys having me on. Appreciate you guys having me on for sure.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Ramon. We really appreciate you, man. Man, what a way to start our first guest podcast. You know, I had an expectation of how this podcast would be, and it's exceeded that by far. So
I'm glad to be on here. I think there's a lot of cool things coming for the podcast. I really like the concept. I like the idea. And I'm excited for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. See you guys. We just wanted to say a huge thank you to anybody who's listened to the first episode of this, and to anybody that started following us on social media. We just wanted to say thank you guys so much. We very much appreciate it.
We know that the best way to get our content out is through word of mouth. And where you can find us is you can find us on Instagram at the Thought That Counts podcast. You can also catch us on YouTube. And the two platforms that will be streaming our podcast for all you listeners is Apple and Spotify. If you have any questions, please feel free to message us through our social media, maybe some ideas that you guys feel you want to see on the podcast. And all of those links will be below. Thank you, guys.